Awesome. Welcome, everyone. I'm psyched to have everyone tuned in here today to talk about building on Opus 4.6. My name is Carly, and I'll get into a little bit more about what I do at Anthropic in a bit. But we can start with some housekeeping. So first off, a recording of this session will be shared within 24 hours. So if you need to step away, don't worry about it. We'll have a recording. Second thing is questions can be submitted anytime using the Q&A button. And I will go through them and ask some of them at the end. I think that's going to be kind of the best part about all this is asking Nico and Olivia some questions about building from you guys. And then finally, give us feedback. This is a new webinar style. It was a fun idea to have customers come on and demonstrate for this model launch how Opus 4.6 lands for them. So would love to hear your feedback. So a little bit about me. My name is Carly Ryan, and I work on a team at Anthropic called Applied AI. The way we like to describe it is Applied AI sits between product, research, and go-to-market. My team actually used to be under research. We now officially are under go-to-market. But kind of the charter, the way I like to think about it is we are looking to optimize Claude models in the wild. We are trying to figure out how they best work out in the world, doing real things. And so sometimes that takes the shape of working with research. Sometimes that takes the shape of being deployed to internal product teams and working with Anthropic product people. But most of the time, the way that looks is working with customers, really smart people looking to do really cool things with our models out in the world. So another cool thing about my team is when a new model comes out, we are some of the first people to get our hands on it. And we internally will bash it a ton. We'll build cool demos. We'll see what it can do. Which is super fun. We also will bring it to some of our customers and ask them what they think, ask them what it does well in. And so I offered to do this webinar for building on Opus 4.6. And originally my idea was to build my own slides, build a demo, and talk about it just from my voice and just from Anthropic's voice. And I was candidly like a little uninspired. I love Opus 4.6, but I thought that the biggest and coolest parts about launching this model were working with customers and hearing from them like, wow, this model really changes the game in my product. And that was like just the most electric part. So today we're bringing on Olivia and Nico from Hex and Shortcut. They'll tell you a little bit about themselves in a little bit, but I'm super excited because they, were some of the early testers of our model and had really positive and cool feedback about it. So a little bit of an agenda. I'm going to go through an introduction to Opus 4.6, what it's good at. I'm going to quickly talk about migrating to Opus 4.6, but if you see the docs panel, that has some links that are really detailed, a prompting guide and a migration guide that I think are going to really be your golden resource for migrating. And then we're going to go into the exciting part, which will be a demo with Hex, with Olivia, and then a demo with Shortcut with Nico, and then some audience Q&A. Cool. So let's start with the basics. Anthropic has 3 model classes, Haiku, Sonnet, and Opus. Most of you probably know this, but I've had some customers be like, oh, I never put together that those are actually like poem types. And so Haiku is, a short and sweet poem. It's 3 lines, but it's still like is beautiful. And so that's kind of our smallest class of model. It's the most affordable and it's the fastest. But I think like the important note there is that like a haiku is still a worthwhile poem and a haiku is still like holds the bar pretty high for intelligence. And then conversely, we have Opus, which is, generally in poetry and music, it's like a great work of art. It's multiple volumes. And this is where we're really looking to push the frontier. This is our biggest model. And then somewhere in between, we have Sonnet, which is like a very popular model, which is neither haiku nor an Opus. I have a personal like soft spot for Opus. I think, or actually a lot of people at Anthropic love Opus because this is where we really are pushing the boundaries. This is where we're really pushing the frontier and looking to change the game. This slide is like little information because the next slide has a lot of information. But this one is just which model to use when. And the thing I want to highlight is Opus is recommended for. Basically, it's recommended for highest intelligence and highest agency use cases. I think some people, when they encounter one of our new Opuses or one of our new models, and they're doing like some single shot thing in Claude.ai, they maybe don't notice like, oh, I don't feel like it's smarter. Like I don't like see the texture of why it's different. But the thing that Anthropic is really looking to push and the boundaries that we're looking to push are on these like long horizon agentic tasks, where it doesn't show through in a single turn, and where it shows through is through tool calling, through doing things that take a long time. Let me get my slides back real quick. Cool. So what's improved since Opus 4.5 is another question you might ask. So one thing is improved situational awareness and adaptive reasoning. So Opus better tracks where problems stand, updates approach based on new evidence rather than doubling down, and provides more grounded progress reporting. It's also better at planning, code review, and debugging. So more polish around scoping work, revisiting assumptions, and self-checking output before calling tasks done, with fewer error loops and runtime surprises. So both of these kind of relate to what I said earlier about like agency and long horizon work. And that's, long running agents, strong multitasking and agent orchestration. Something that we noticed a lot internally and customers have noticed is Opus 4.6 markedly spins out more sub-agents and more parallel tools. It can handle more concurrent work streams, manage complex tool call sequence, and delegate effectively in multi-agent setups. This has like a very meaningful effect in a lot of customers' products. And then finally, one of the things that I'm really excited about and we'll hear about from Nico is we see a meaningful step change for finance, life science, and cybersecurity use cases. We're seeing that Opus 4.6 is the best model for knowledge work. When we think about knowledge work or like knowledge work capabilities, we think about 3 pillars. So the first one is search, which is to find the right information. The second one is analyze, to make sense of that information. And the final one is to create, to produce valuable assets from that information. And so you can think about the skills that like a very skilled, well-trained knowledge worker has, an auditor after 10 years of doing that work. A lot of the capabilities fall into those 3 things, like can you search, can you analyze, and can you create? And again, we'll hear more about this shortly, which I'm excited about. So one thing we introduced with Opus 4.6 is adaptive thinking. This is where we let Claude decide when and how much to reason based on the effort level you set. So rather than token budgets, we basically have this like self-modulating thinking that Claude does itself. So the benefits, cost, performance optimization, and then also latency. And then one thing that I would want to shout out too is like developer experience. Like you don't have to think about token budgets and max out your token budgets. So before, with like traditional extended thinking, customers enabled thinking for all requests and had to set a token budget. How they would pick the token budget was kind of an art and a science. And Claude would think on every query up to that limit, whether it needed to or not. And now with adaptive thinking, Claude decides when and if to reason based on the effort level you set as well. On a higher effort, Claude thinks on most queries. At lower effort, it skips the thinking on simpler requests. And hopefully also Nico and Olivia will tell us a little bit more about how adaptive thinking works in their product as well, because people are excited about this one. The next thing we're doing with Opus 4.6 that we're excited about is context compaction in beta. This increases effective context window length by automatically summarizing older context when approaching context limits. And the benefit is context optimization. So a lot of us have maybe encountered this in Claude Code with Compact. That might be kind of like the first time we've thought about compaction of context windows. And the current solution is like most people do this client side or in their product. And Anthropic is offering now that we will do it on our side if you provide the strategy. So I'm going to go through a little bit on migrating to Opus 4.6. Again, I think the links are going to be like your best resource here. But yeah, cool. So the first thing, these 3 things are more like API headers that you can think about. So the first one is effort. Effort allows control over how eager Claude is to spend tokens, giving the ability to trade off between response thoroughness and token efficiency. It's important to note that this contributes to like all the types of tokens, so not just thinking, it also contributes to tool calling and other output types. Next one is adaptive thinking. So Opus 4.6 uses thinking type adaptive. Claude decides when and how much to think on its own. And so we're moving away from this manual token budget. And the effort parameter can be used in tandem with adaptive thinking to try and tune that from the developer side, but you also can trust Claude to know when. And then finally, we're deprecating pre-fills. Starting with Opus 4.6, pre-filled responses on the last assistant turn are no longer supported. So this is something to think about if you're using pre-fills today. And then these are more prompting tips. So the others were, API headers. This is more tips on prompting. So as I said, we have trained Opus 4.6 to be a lot more autonomous and have more agency. But that means that Opus 4.6 does significantly more upfront exploration than previous models. So if your old prompts used aggressive language to force thoroughness, you might want to rethink that. I would try Opus 4.6, see how it works and how it looks in your product. But we've seen that people will have to revisit some of their old prompts that had to push the models to have more agency and to do more exploration. So the next one is subagent use. Opus 4.6 has a strong bias towards spawning subagents, sometimes for tasks where a direct grep or a single tool call would be faster. What you want to do here is add explicit guidance about when subagents are and aren't warranted, if you see this. Another thing that I've seen people have to do is if they already have explicit guidance to trigger as many subagents as possible, you might want to peel that back because Opus 4.6 will go a little wild. Finally, autonomy and irreversible actions. Without guidance, Opus 4.6 may take hard to reverse actions. So you want to add explicit confirmation prompts for destructive operations if you want a human in the loop. This is a really good product tip anyways to think about, where do you want human in the loop? Where should actions not be allowed? But we are trying to push Opus 4.6 to just take more action and have more autonomy. Amazing. Okay, well, so now we're going to get into the meat of it, and Olivia will join us. Hi, Olivia. It looks like you might be muted.
Can you hear me?
Okay, yeah.
Amazing. Hello.
Would love if you could give our watchers just a quick intro about you, and then we can dive into Hex and Opus 4.6.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Olivia. I'm a product lead at Hex, where I focus a ton on all of our agentic analytics surface areas. We're going to get into a bunch of what that is, but I spent a lot of time talking to Carly on how we can best take advantage of Anthropic models, and I'm just really excited to be here and share more about what we've learned.
Amazing. So why don't you tell me a little bit more about what you're building at Hex?
Yeah, absolutely. So some quick background here. Hex is the AI analytics platform that really just makes it easy for anyone to ask and answer questions with data. There's kind of three pillars of our product. We have this really incredible agentic notebook surface area where you can go really deep using SQL, Python, native charts, input parameters, kind of everything you would need to do a deep dive analysis. And we have this app surface, so you can take that analysis and turn it into dashboards. But more and more, what I'm most excited about is all of our conversational Q&A features. So it kind of brings the best of our notebooks and our data apps, but brings it to this really cool Q&A surface area. And that's where we're seeing a huge amount of growth right now, which is really exciting. But underlying all of this is this really kind of important context layer. And this is what we spent a lot of our time talking about, Carly, is what is the context that empowers the agents to actually have good answers. And so at Hex, we kind of think of this as figuring out how to build this really awesome context loop where we can take deep answers or deep insights, data teams have found, turn those into artifacts that are scalable and trustable and can be knowledge for the model to go reuse, and then keep iterating on those. And you have this really cool compounding context loop where as you work longer in Hex, the agent actually can get smarter and use more of your previous work to actually answer questions.
Yeah, I love that continuous learning aspect as well. So a lot of what you and Nico do, I think surface level might seem a lot like code gen, and that's where Anthropic models are most well known. Can you tell us, I think on the first time we met, you kind of were describing to me by why it's actually very different from CodeGen. There's some similarities and some differences, but what makes it still hard to do data analytics today, and potentially harder than CodeGen?
Yeah, totally. So I think CodeGen is a part of data analytics. And so we get to benefit every time the models get better at Python and SQL, we get a benefit. But a lot of what we do is a lot more than just generating the code. Here's actually a really good example from one of our evals. Carly's familiar with this, I think, benchmark, because we always send this specific example. The models always trip up on this question, and it's so funny. If you look at the question, what is the top country for fraud? This is actually considered an easy question, and it should be pretty simple. And what ends up happening is the data set, as you can see, is a multi-series data set where there is both fraud volume and fraud rate. And models by default love to just look at fraud volume. But if you're a true data analyst, you want to actually look at both those values. And the kind of thing that you'd want the agent to respond with is something more like this answer, where you see a chart that shows you both and calls out that, hey, your organization prefers measuring by fraud rate, but you should also take a look at fraud volume. And so the answers here are not necessarily as black and white, and they're a lot harder to test for. And we find it's actually a lot harder to evaluate models. And because of this, the nature of these questions are actually far less black and white. You can't unit test them. And there's a lot of taste and judgment required for a lot of data analyst work.
Yeah. I feel like it does boil down a lot to both this taste. I think that you learn through looking at data yourself, or in high school math, what looks right, what looks wrong, how to think about trade-offs, how to be a good communicator when you're thinking about data. And also how to make the trade-offs yourself. And then I think the second thing that's really kind of clicked for me when you highlighted was this verification. If you make a small error, it's really hard to verify in data, and it's much easier in software engineering style code gen.
Exactly. There just really isn't always a correct answer. And a lot of it has to do with just, what does your organization think? And we'll actually get into that in the demo. We kind of think about that a lot in the way we build our product.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I guess we can get into the demo, but maybe you can voice over just to start, what does Opus 4.6 unlock for Hex specifically? I wanted you to come on because I think that when you guys encountered Opus 4.6, you mentioned that it changed the game.
Yeah, it was really awesome. I think there's a couple big things, and we'll touch on in the demo. But adaptive reasoning for us is huge because we get all types of questions, easy and hard. And I can tell you a little, you can go into more depth about them, but the ability for the model to just figure out how much to think is a game changer for us, and it makes a much better product experience. The other thing is just much better context reasoning. And this eval in particular is one of the many that Opus did a lot better on. A lot of the work of our agents is actually looking really deeply at the context and not over fixating on what the user asks for, since often users can ask very vague prompts.
Yeah, awesome. Love it. Should we jump into the demo?
Yeah, let's do it. All right. Okay, amazing. Carly, can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Sweet. All right, so we are here in Slack. As many of you probably know and love, most questions or conversations happen in Slack. So one of the features that we've seen growing a lot is our Slack integration. And so if you have a data channel or kind of just anywhere you want to ask conversations, you can start in Slack. And so here's actually a quick little example. Help me understand how each segment is performing right now for closing deals. So what's going to happen is we actually kick off a thread in Hex. You can actually click in and view in Hex, but we'll also bring all the answers to you directly in Slack, which is awesome. So I'm going to actually just go ahead and open this up in Hex. Let me go over here, actually. And so what this is going to do is actually kick off the Hex agent, which is our conversational Q&A feature. And you can actually see it's going to go and look through all of your context and hopefully get us an awesome answer where I can just keep going from here. While this is going, I'm going to talk a little bit about our context layers. So everything that really powers this agent. So what we have is something called the Context Studio. And this is where data teams have a lot of observability features to understand what are the types of conversations and questions folks are asking, so they know where to put effort and time into curating context. So you can actually see what kinds of questions folks are asking. And one of the things that I really think is really cool is the ability to look at conversation topics and figure out like, oh, hey, do we see a lot of warnings in certain areas? And so one of the things that we're actually doing offline is like looking through the conversations to try and figure out, did the agent have the right context it needed? And does it need more issues? And so you can actually see we have some here. We have missing context or data limitations. And this gives data teams a lot more power to understand, hey, where do we need to go to put more, where do we need to put more effort into our context curation?
Very cool. I love it that you can kick it off in Slack too. That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, that's where we've seen a ton of conversation happening. So we want to make sure we're where folks are. And also you can kick it off from Claude as well with our MCP.
Love it. Love it. So maybe we can walk through like where, or maybe is this what's running on the agent, like where we're seeing Opus 4.6 do things that, the other models couldn't.
Yeah, absolutely. So while this is going, one thing that we're seeing is it does just a really good job of being very thorough with looking at the context before coming up with a conversation. And I'll show you an example that's pre-run in a sec. But when you're working with data, you have a lot of context. You have usually a full warehouse. We have, Hex assets like projects. You also have things like model data, which are different asset types that we have for curation in Hex. And you'll often want to run a lot of SQL queries to understand what the shape of the data looks like. And so the agent can do a lot here to understand how to answer something. And so just to give you an example, here are some charts that it's created so I can actually dive in to better understand what my answers are here. But all of this really matters of like, can the agent pay attention to all of the context? So here's actually a really good example. So we have Opus 4.6 on the left. We have a previous model that we were using on the right. And on the right was actually a pretty common failure point for models that we were seeing and had been seeing for a long time in the data analysis world. A user tends to ask a somewhat ambiguous question or a question that maybe is not perfectly worded to how the data is mapped in at the warehouse level. So in this case, how many subscribers are on my Pro plan? And the agent did a pretty good job. It got the answer in terms of it gave the user the number of subscribers on the Pro plan. But what we can actually see is that there's a gotcha here. At some point, they changed the Pro name plan to Professional. And the agent really locked on to what the user asked for, which is the Pro plan. And it didn't actually call out that there's this other category, Professional. And so with Opus 4.6 on the left, you can actually see it did answer the same question. It went a step further and actually told you, hey, you should look at the active subscribers, not just all of the subscribers. Yeah. And it also called out the nuance here that there's another plan called Professional, which the user might have meant. And these are kind of like the small differences in model behavior that make a huge difference for a product like ours, where, like we were saying earlier, there's a lot of ambiguity in the way folks interact with our product. And there's not always a right answer.
Yeah. I think that's awesome. I think I like your guys' eval set because I think it's a lot of these kind of like gotchas, which is funny that we're just like looking to trick the model and see where it has good judgment. But even a human can make this mistake, it's like, oh, I just want to see what's on Pro plan. My colleague asked me, I'm going to look up Pro. But I think like the good taste and the good practice thing would be to explore the data a little bit before jumping to conclusions about, potentially the bias in the question. And you guys and other people have seen that Opus is just like, has more of that like exploration. And this is what I talked about in the prompting as well. It has this like exploratory kind of predilection. And so it might find these gotchas faster or better.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of thing makes a huge difference for our product. One of the things that we always say is, data teams tend to be skeptical of the data that they're looking at always. And that's something that models were never skeptical of. And so that's something that's like really exciting to us in Opus 4.6 that we're starting to see more of.
Yeah, I think this is actually a great segue. Like, I feel like we've talked about this and even internally with data analytics, like outside of Hex, we see this. can you illustrate like some of the ways that models used to flop or didn't have enough skepticism? I think there's like some funny anecdotes there. I can share some as well.
Yeah, one that I can think of is I remember so I use Hex literally nonstop to kind of look at feature adoption. I'm always trying to understand how our people are using our features and what habits are changing. And I remember it was like the week after Thanksgiving, and I was like talking with the Hex agent, and it gave me this really big like you should be really concerned. There's been a huge drop in usage. Like, this is very concerning. And it was just the week after Thanksgiving. It was really not a big deal. But because I had asked, about feature adoption, the agent was really focused on what I had asked for and had a hard time taking a step back and reasoning through kind of broader context. And we're actually seeing this even now, just like a couple months later. We're seeing that models are a lot better at this now, which I think is a really awesome one, because it's always really funny when it's like, this is so concerning, but it's just a whole.
Yeah, it's also like the drama Claude. Like, it'll be like alert emoji.
Yeah,
revenue has dropped, and it's like, no, it's actually just one day into December.
Yeah.
Cool. So I guess actually, I think this is a good segue to potentially talking about evals a little bit.
Yeah.
And maybe some more of the gotchas. I think like just even examples. But I think you maybe were going to have a visual about just some of your evals. Is that possible?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So I have a few queued up here. And I think one thing that matters for us a lot is like paying attention to every single model and trying to understand what's happening and what's going wrong. So we have this pretty extensive eval set, and we're consistently trying to build on it and make it better. But this is how we kind of understand how a model performs. And so we always run evals on a new model. And there's a couple things we look at. One of them is objective met, and that's kind of what this shows. But there's also a couple other things. Tool efficiency is one, as well as like the ability for the model to collaborate with you. And generally, one of the reasons we are always really excited about the Anthropic model is, more often than not, we want our product to feel like a collaborator and not just something that takes a long time and gives you necessarily the most accurate answer. We care about that collaboration aspect a lot more. But in 4.6, we have a couple evals here. So this is actually a little behind the scenes of what our evals look like. But here, this is actually the eval that I was kind of pointing out earlier, the fraud rate versus fraud volume. So Opus 4.6, it actually did a really good job going through the manual or like the, kind of like curated context to realize that this organization defined fraud as fraud rate, not just fraud volume. And so it was able to capture it correctly. And so kind of like Carly, you said earlier, going back to looking deeply at the context is something that we've consistently seen in 4.6. Another example of this that we saw, there was a question here. The question's at the top. What is the average transaction volume? And in this example, and I'm sorry, you're kind of really seeing behind the scenes, the raw answers and everything. In this case, the agent was it basically hit a wall. And usually when agents hit a wall with SQL, it'll kind of like, they often kind of just like give up and they're like, actually, I can't find the data, or they kind of just like overpower forward. And in this case, Opus 4.6 kind of took a step back and looked at other tables to find the right, where Swift, like what was Swift charge, which was like a type of card scheme. Not an acquirer in this case. And it was able to actually pivot correctly to find the new table that was needed, even though the user's question was extremely ambiguous.
Yeah, so I guess this is like resilience too, kind of like.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Whereas in previous models, we found that like they also like tend to just like make assumptions if they hit a wall. And so this is actually a good example where the model just kind of assumed that the Swift charge was an acquirer, not a card scheme.
Awesome. Is this the empty array one?
This is the empty array one. So this is another awesome one. So this was a case, the question was basically asking for, I will scroll up here, for certain account types, what was the average fee for the card scheme for that Swift charge, which charged for transaction volume. And in this case, this one was really interesting. Opus 4.6 was properly looked at all the different data and realized that there was an empty array meant a wildcard, which meant actually that counted for what it wanted to include to compute this. Whereas previous models would, again, overfixate on what the user was asking for and actually not properly look through all of the data to understand the nuances. And so Opus 4.6 was able to get this correct, whereas previous models had a much limited set of data it was looking at, so fundamentally was getting the wrong answer.
Yeah, I love getting in the weeds of your eval, so I'm glad you brought these up. And I love the empty array one because I think this was one of the ones when we come out with a new model, we ask you what it's doing well, but then we also ask you like, where is it still failing? And like, how can we think about that? And I feel like last December, this was one that was still failing. And then I was super psyched when it was like, no, Opus 4.6 like can get this one now. And so that's just awesome. Also, I like your eval suite. I think you guys like vibe coded it all in-house, right?
Yeah, all of our eval tools are vibe coded in-house, which is really fun. And we're working on vibe coding more evals right now, which has been really cool.
Awesome. Okay, I could ask you a million more questions.
Yeah.
But I think maybe we go to Nico and then I save the questions for the end. I guess let's do one more. You talked about MCP and just like how you're thinking about different product surfaces. So I'm curious, like, what are some of the big product questions Hex is working through right now? And like, how are you thinking about this ever-changing landscape?
Yeah, great question. I think the big thing, and I'm sure everyone feels this right now, is where's the best place to put our time? Right? And like where, if the puck keeps moving, and how can you stay on top of that? And I think one of the conversations we were just having, for example, is like, should we go all in on MCP? Should we continue building this in-house agent experience? And I think if I fundamentally take a step back, the thing I'm always thinking about is what is Hex's strategic advantage? What can we do better than anyone else? And that's where we should be putting our time in. We shouldn't do things that we think, Anthropic is just going to go do. And so that's a huge question for us. And one of the things that we believe right now is that working with data is fundamentally very hard. There's a lot of gotchas. It can be very finicky. And so you really do want a dedicated experience for it. That entry point might be anywhere, like Claude or any other tool. But for really hard questions, you're going to want a dedicated agent surface that really understands the nuance of working with data.
I love it. Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, well, you'll come back for Q&A from audience, and I have some saved questions for that as well. Thanks for chatting and demoing.
Amazing. Yeah.
Nico. Hi.
Hey, what's up, Carly? How are you?
Good. How about you give our watchers like a quick intro of yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm happy to be here. My name's Nico. I'm the co-founder of a research lab called Fundamental. We spun out about 2 years ago from MIT, where my co-founder was a professor in computational neuroscience, and we set out to do very broad, vague, and ambitious research of just giving machines a lot of the fundamental human qualities that they didn't currently have. We explored a lot of things, giving them collaboration, giving them like long-term and working memory, and we ended up building agents that could play Minecraft, which is pretty cool. And then somewhere along the mess, we gave them access to a computer. And we had set the state of the art in OS world, which is the most important benchmark for computer use. Actually, I think Opus 4.6 just hit like 70, which was like over human level. But this was about a year ago, and we decided to just like pursue building products on that technology. So I led a small team and built Shortcut. Shortcut is a superhuman Excel agent that can do just about anything a human can do on Excel. And it's meant to be used as a tool to make doing Excel work far, far easier, the same way we use Claude Code or whatever to do our software engineering.
Awesome. Yeah, I feel like one of the through lines for like what you've built and worked on is just like pushing the models past what maybe they're currently capable of, and just like thinking about the frontier, which is really cool. Because I think that when you started Shortcut even 7 months ago, it was like people were still so dubious of models being able to understand finance, and I think that maybe has changed with newer models. But maybe we can kick off your demo, and then we can like discuss it while it runs.
Yeah, totally. So I'll flip it up here.
And then people can see what Shortcut looks like too. Personally, I've learned a lot about like finance and Excel through just like looking at your product and learning about your evals, because this is not my area of expertise. And there were times when it was not Claude's area of expertise either.
Sure, and I can talk about that time. I believe, Carly, you might have to give me permission to share my screen, or maybe get to stop sharing.
Okay, yeah, let's see.
Perfect. So I'm going to do a variety of demos all live here, and I wanted this to be conversational. Most of the tasks can take somewhere between like 2 and 15 minutes, and some of these are longer term. So I will fire these off and then answer the question that you had pointed to. And to tee them off just a little bit, first of all, I'll send them, and then I'll tee them off. So I have these two very finance-specific tasks. This first one is this like professional grade institutional FP&A model that you would do like 10-year financial projections over. Extremely built out, extremely rich. There's a lot of dependencies. Pull it back here. There's a lot of dependencies across linked sheet references that you'd have to get right. And what I'm going to ask it to do is to build out this 12-month projection sheet entirely. And it has to be done correctly. So this is a part of our internal eval suite, something that, actually just until Opus 4.6, this thing wasn't even doing remotely close. I can talk about how we do these evals. And then another task I have here is we are going to be pricing a bond. I know it's part of sort of deep finance, but it is important. I think the global bond market's like bigger than the global equity market's like $100+ trillion. Something that investment bankers will be doing many, many times a day, even when they're working with bonds. So this is a task that is specifically bottlenecked by like the complexity of really, really difficult finance work. It's kind of fun to think that we're doing these tasks when I was building Shortcut like a year ago, and we were like just barely adding 3 columns together. Your big question before was like, what was it like building when we weren't there, and how did you know to kind of get there? For us, is the thing solvable by machine learning? Meaning, is it verifiable? And then is it in the best interest of the lab to solve these things? So the moment that you feel like the capability overhang allows you to do anything that would be valuable in that space, and that it is machine verifiable and that you want to pursue it, for us, it was a no-brainer. We had 1 or 2 very powerful experiences back when we were building with Sonnet 3.7, I believe. And it felt like a no-brainer that the same thing was about to happen to knowledge work, specifically Excel, that had just happened to all of us with software engineering. And so for us, that's how we made that decision. So I will also sort of talk over what's happening in these tasks. Sort of like Carly alluded to, Opus 4.6 is very, almost aggressive is the word, for like spinning off sub-agents. Now, in our context, that's a good thing, because the bottleneck on this task isn't necessarily financial complexity. It's that this is a massive frickin' model, right? Like charts of every type, dependencies with thousands and thousands of formulas. So the bottleneck is that a lot of these really complex big models don't have like very obvious scaffolding. So you have to be able to use and build like sort of ergonomic tools for your agents to access the things that they need to access to make the right decisions over. So in that context here specifically, sub-agents are fantastic because we spin off sub-agents to explore different sheets in parallel, meaning each of the sub-agents can provide a summary of it. It won't, contribute to context rot, and it's going to give Opus the ability to take the information it needs to make the decision that it has to do. So I will, again, voice over, but it's built a to-do list. It feels like it has a good understanding of the task here. And it's going to start chugging away. So I'll flip to the 12-month projection. At the same time, it looks like it's ready to start making changes. It will preview the changes to me to approve or accept. For the sake of the demo, I'm just going to accept all. It's like bypass permissions in Cloud Code. And I know that I can roll back to any point in the chain as well.
Awesome. So it sounds like, I guess, the bottlenecks, just to like paraphrase, and I'm curious if you have more to add, and the bottlenecks that maybe Opus 4.6, got past. And then I also want to hear about the bottlenecks that we're still working on. But one of them is just like spawning sub-agents and figuring out how to handle like massive amounts of context. And then also finance knowledge. Does it feel like there's any more that, Opus 4.6 maybe was a step change? But is there anything else that Opus 4.6?
Yeah. I don't think the special answer is that there were these other things that we know that it does better than other people know. I think the real thing is that 4.6 as a class is a massive step change specific to knowledge work and intelligence. It feels like it's smarter than 4.5 in coding, right? But like, it feels like the jump from Opus 4.1 to 4.5 in finance work. It's significantly more intelligent. You even see this in the model cards for Sonnet 4.6. It's smarter than Opus 4.6 in specific to finance requirements. It has its other constraints. But to me, the story is that like, it's very obvious that Anthropic is highly, highly prioritizing intelligence in these domains now. And things that weren't quite possible are possible now. And you actually do have to do what you said earlier, which is like you have to actually, constrain some of the prompting because Opus 4.6 is far more aggressive than 4.5 is. Yeah. It's also less verbose, which can make it feel a little weird in personality sense. But for us, like a no-brainer, and I could tell you why again in our eval suite, but to look through here, we are starting to fill this out. This was entirely empty. If you flip through it, it's all formula driven. It's all in the standard account or the standard accounting/finance formatting. The Spark lines are populating. And I'm noticing that the current liabilities are empty here, and it's done. And again, I want to reiterate, if you're doing spreadsheet work and you're not using AI, I do think you're falling behind, but you're going to use it the same way that you're going to use it in coding. Like, you don't expect to one-shot all your stuff. You're going to want to parallelize as much planning before and as much auditing afterwards as possible, and probably never hand anything off that you haven't used AI to audit. So like, the very natural thing for me to ask here is, hey, why are current liabilities empty? And like, I need to know that. Another thing, so they're not empty. So look, the assumption is that monthly working capital balance was 0, which now makes sense to me. I'll do a couple of checks. I even will oftentimes, and this is like, I won't go through all of these in length. But when I talk about parallelizing auditing, this is the same thing we do in coding. I will say, audit this in full, grade it. And I'll have another independent agent say this. And one thing we know about agents is that they're not too proud, meaning that if you have many, many independent agents critique each other, they will converge on the optimal critique. And then you can use that to make the most well-educated, edits that you have to make. It's a very similar flow to developing now, and it's going to be in probably most of knowledge work. I will flip back to this task. I saw some questions in the Q&A. I want to be able to make sure that we can answer these. Specific questions about like vision. As of last night, we pushed an update, actually giving Opus 4.6 vision, or like a screenshot tool over the spreadsheet, which we find is like a material improvement in the formatting accuracy. So it's actually looking at like what it's doing here. It's like, okay, I kind of like what we're doing. Here's a clean bond price. Here's like a double check on my work. I also repaired all the broken name ranges. So if I click here, like, you can kind of get a feel for the complexity of even just the formula syntax and the structure. Like, this is a very complicated sort of if-else equivalent, and very specific finance math, which was the other bottleneck. It's like the right way to craft bond pricing it just was not possible until Opus 4.6 in a consistent manner.
Yeah, awesome. How do you like have confidence when to switch to a new model? Or I guess like my lead up there is to talk about your evals a little bit, because you guys have awesome evals, and that's like something I value personally a lot about a partnership, because I love
Sure.
love your eval screen, which is
I know you guys are big fans of our evals. So for us, I think if you're building in a verifiable domain, meaning that you can prove you're right or wrong. For example, PowerPoint is hard to verify. Word is impossible. Writing is impossible to verify in most ways. But if you're building in a verifiable domain, you should be, my take is, the most important thing you can possibly be doing is building a good benchmark. And when I say that, I mean, is it sufficiently difficult and sufficiently in distribution? Meaning, does it perfectly match what your users need to get accomplished? And is there a big delta between where you are and where you need to get to? So we spend most of our research engineering effort on benchmark infrastructure. So we run a benchmark every hour on production. We run experiments, dozens in parallel, with different prompt changes, new tools that we build for the agent, and we see what works and what doesn't. We have a leaderboard, and we also have a history of this benchmark. So for us, if you see over the last 3 months or so, we were scoring 6 out of 10. That means 60% of the cells were exactly accurate in comparison to a handcrafted, expert validated file for that task. That again is perfectly in distribution. Like, we got it from the real world. We started off at 6 in December. We're at 4 or less than 4 when we launched Shortcut. So we're now at a little north of 8, and you can tell very specifically when Opus 4.6 launched. Right, we went from about I think low 7s to low 8s, which in our customers felt immediately. They were like, this thing is significantly smarter. And when I tested Opus, I mean, so we ran the model in our eval suite before launch. It was a shocking jump. I wasn't sure if the same was going to be true for other people's evals, and I think it was disproportionately strong in Excel. But for me, it was like I couldn't sleep. Like, I felt like this is the moment that's going to change, and it's obvious that we're at a hard takeoff for Excel. And I'm certain that like PowerPoint people felt the same.
That's amazing. Yeah. Curious to hear more about, you said your evals just showed it, and I think maybe you felt it when you were using your product, but it sounds like the customer reception has also felt it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm a builder, like built Shortcut, grown, made a lot of mistakes as a founder for sure. I think one of them might have been like I spent too much time just like religiously focused on improving the product. But in the pursuit of that, I kind of realized that like enterprises are kind of banging the door down to buy this thing. So we started having some conversations, and I realized that a failure of mine that I don't want to make, and I hope others learn from, but I think you have to learn it yourself, is that the bottleneck to enterprise sales really isn't like, oh, you have to go through security handholding and like go through a long process. It's not true. If your product is good enough, like that's not necessarily the bottleneck. And in fact, the bottleneck actually might still be product quality, and their constraints and their feedback might actually be more in distribution than anybody else's. So that feedback flywheel was huge for us. And the moment the 4.6 launched, of course, we're doing some other things in the background as well. But our enterprise motion just like took a very serious step forward.
Nice. That's awesome. Okay, well, I want to have Olivia come back on, and so we can go through some of the audience questions. I have 2 to actually kick us off, but then I'll make sure to get to. Oh wait, do you want to see? Are we showing the end?
Oh yeah, well sure. Obviously, what you would do is audit every single number, and you're going to ask multiple of these agents to do it before you hand it off. But yes, it built the model in its entirety.
Amazing, love it. Cool. So I'm gonna start with like a flop moment. Like, what would you warn other product builders about? Don't do what we did moments, so that people watching can like avoid that. Whoever wants to, this is fine.
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. I think it's really, I think this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, but really thinking about what your product can do uniquely well and finding your strategic focus. I think it's really easy to want to hill climb on quality, but what ends up happening is the models just get better on their own. And I feel like a good example internally is we tried to actually build this like question routing system where if it was a simple question, it would use like a faster model. And if it was like a more complex question, it would use like like something like Opus. But what we found is it was very hard to actually build something like that. And we actually immediately ended up cutting the project. But then, adaptive reasoning came out and it kind of just solved that for us. And so I always think back to like, where were there times we spent engineering effort and time where like fundamentally the model was just going to get better and solve it for us?
Yeah.
Yeah. I have to always like harp back to benchmarks for us. So when we launched, we did this demonstration that it was like, it solved this financial modeling World Cup demonstration. It did the case right, which was shocking and very cool and like a symbol of power. But that's actually not how users use the product. Meaning that like the demonstration, even some of our internal evals, and that was a part of the eval suite, were just like not perfectly aligned with the real use cases. Specifically, what was news to me is that people are trying to use Shortcut for like every incremental prompt. They're not just like one-shotting like something from scratch, for example, or like the lovable bolt equivalent to coding. Like they're not doing that. They're trying to do the cloud code thing, meaning that your benchmarks actually have to capture multi-turn. And multi-turn is this like extremely hairy problem of like everything forks in every way. And then how do you like really verify that each independent multi-turn is correct? And it's a real science problem. So for us, that was like a quick learned lesson to make sure. And I don't think your benchmark could ever be in distribution enough, but you should probably plan these things ahead.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. What do you guys credit for being able to migrate models so quickly in production? I know that you get confidence from your evals. Is that the main thing? Or are there other things like culture, drop everything and hustle for a new model? Curious what you give credit to.
I'll take it. Yeah, we have seen this benchmark really mirror retention and like revenue. Meaning that the same point Olivia's making, like we can do all the clever context engineering we want, and we're going to have to be able to like, make sure that the tools accessible to the agent really do up the performance, the same way Cloud Code does. But the step function change you get in a model jump is like one of the biggest things that can happen to your agent product. So the moment we get a notice that like there might be a model for us to benchmark, we will do it and drop things. Thankfully, we haven't had to have too much like prompt engineering So we run the benchmarks, and then we do what we call like dog fooding. We do the entire team, 20 people in like one room. We all use it, and we're like, okay, this like it definitely has like a weird spunk or pizzazz that's different, and we have to address this in the prompts. Or like there are some subtle things that aren't even fully captured in the benchmarking, like some formatting differences. Like it has a different taste for stuff. This is where benchmark plus subjective taste, usually one day of dog fooding is enough. That's not true always for different model providers. It becomes a bit of the moat. You kind of want to play like each provider a little bit specifically.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's the same thing for us. We have a ton of benchmarks and evals that we run to get quantitative, insight. But then it's awesome because someone puts like a 30-minute block on the entire company's calendar to like go try the model on whatever surface that the person chooses. So I think like company-wide dog fooding is just like a great way to build conviction and get to know a model. Olivia, do you have anything to add there about like Hex's culture around model launches?
I would just like double down around the culture piece. Like this was something in the last 4 years we've actually really intentionally tried to prioritize, and I will literally push out our own product deadlines or feature deadlines if a new model comes out and we need to put resourcing there. And so we definitely now have a culture. Carly messages us, all right, we're on it immediately, and whatever we're working on will just get paused because like Nico was saying, every time a new model comes out, there's such a huge delta for us. And we think that is like the most valuable thing that we can be paying attention to and working on.
Yeah. I think it's really hard to stay like in that cadence because like models are coming out so often. I mean, we've launched 2 in the last 2 weeks. But I love that. And like, I do think it's a win-win when like we can all launch at the same time. That is amazing. Also like for this like marketing feeling of having like Hex and Shortcut be able to say like we now have Opus 4.6 as well. Okay, Nico, this is kind of a spicy one, but it seems like there was like a few different questions that kind of address this. But Anthropic has recently released some Excel features. How does Shortcut think about this tension?
Yeah, what they tell you is to build in a space where you stand to benefit a lot if the models get better. What they don't tell you is that if you do that really, really well, the model companies will directly compete with you. Now that's fine for us. I figured as much. I figured the same from Microsoft and Google. It depends on the ambition you have. I fundamentally believe, though I love Carly, I love the Anthropic team, they're my favorite of the model providers. I don't think one company can be everything to everybody.
Yeah.
And for us, Excel sounds narrow. We're also a research lab, but for you, it's like extremely among one of the many, many things you do. So I believe we are going to beat you. And if we don't, I deserve to lose. So that's what we've signed up for. But I would really recommend to people who are building at this overhang, if you really do believe Anthropic is going to compete with you, be ready for the knife fight of your life. For us, that's what we signed up for. So I mean, I have no regrets. And then we have a Wall Street Prep just like released yesterday that we ranked ahead of it. Like we like where we are, but it's going to be a never-ending sprint.
Yeah. I mean, and it is a point of tension. I think that like we are looking to train the best model at this so you can use it, and then we also like have launched a product here. And it is interesting, like for me personally, working with customers where I have no involvement in like the cloud for Excel, and so like actually my stake is to work with you to make it best for Shortcut because we want our cloud models to be in other people's products too. But I like the way you put that. Okay, Olivia. So when a new model like Opus 4.6 gets released, how does Hex perform testing and validation of the new model in Hex's business context to make sure agents still perform the same or better and doesn't regress?
Yeah, absolutely. This kind of just goes back to our evals. That's first and foremost. We have a number of different eval sets. We have some, external data analysis eval sets, but we also have a bunch of internal ones that we've created that are both specific to the Hex environment, specific to our own data. So we actually ask it real data questions that we internally have, as well as specific to our agent harness setup. So if you know about Hex, there's a lot of things that are very specific to Hex. And so we want to make sure that our agent harness continues to perform really well. And so we look at all of those different eval suites and determine, hey, do we overall see a performance and no net regressions? And then exactly what Nico said, immediately we all start testing it out and using it internally. And we're looking at a bunch of things. It's not just, hey, does the model get the answer correct? We also look at things like latency. We want the product to feel really interactive and collaborative. And so that's something we care a lot about. And on the product team, like that's something that we think about is not just overall, like not just optimizing for accuracy, but also for the feeling in the product.
Yeah, that's awesome. I like that strategy. And then I guess as a follow-up to just your demo, did the harness or system prompt change between the two versions of the Pro plan question? Are those differences purely due to the model swap?
Yes, I literally like swapped them out under the hood and asked the same question. Like those were like literally asked within 5 minutes of each other. There was nothing that changed, which is really interesting and cool to see. And that was like fun for me. I actually wasn't expecting it to work. And so I was expecting to have to, look through a bunch of questions, but it immediately got that one, which was really cool.
Yeah. I think that like when we are working with people to like test our models and we want to understand how it performs against, Sonnet or the older version of Opus, like what we love to see is when you just switch out the model and don't change the harness, because that gives us a lot of insight. But then of course, like product builders, I think you both have maybe made some minor changes to your prompt when you actually launched Opus 4.6, because a new model just has a new personality. And like there might be, you might want to have two movable pieces, both your prompts and the model. So Nico, Shortcut's multi-agent architecture for Excel tasks is fascinating. When multiple agents collaborate on something like a DCF model, how do you handle disagreements between agents? Say one agent's output contradicts another's assumption. Is there a controller agent that resolves conflicts, or is it more of a pipeline? I don't know what DCF models are, so you're the expert here. But I think like handling disagreement is a really interesting one, just like generally outside.
No, for sure. I will say we don't have like a super advanced like multi-agent at the action sequence framework yet. So what we try to do is like use multi-agent both in the planning and in the auditing. And then we think if we do both of those things well, you can probably have like a single agent that spins off sub-agents for exploring, but not for acting. Now that probably won't be true for very long. I know it's not like everyone's probably starting to to use these parallel action agents for all things that can be parallelizable. So for in the specific instance of a DCF, you're going to have your drivers, but then you might have the 3-statement model, all of which can be done in parallel. You might have the DCF, which can be done in parallel, the football field and sensitivity analysis. Like none of these are sequential in like nature, and they can and should be done. And now your limitations are actually like, what does the Excel API actually allow you to do in terms of concurrency? Which there are software engineering problems and agent questions. Now, specifically, I think the coolest thing, and my co-founder taught me this, there's like an economic theorem called like the Almonds agreement theorem, which is that like given the same priors, the same data, any two rational human beings, it's impossible for two rational human beings to agree to disagree. Like they will find the right outcome. Now, humans are not rational. We know this. I'm not rational. Agents are rational, and they're super intelligent, probably. So what you do is you can give all of these agents plans to each other, and they will converge on the best plan. They will converge on the best verification. So now you need some sort of multi-agent architecture to allow these agents to communicate with each other, which is like sort of difficult. So one way we've done it, which is kind of cool, is we've built this like OpenClaw inspired memory system in which our agent has access to the entire trace history that it's produced for you, meaning it's aware of these other traces that are happening in parallel. And you can ask any of the agents, like, hey, what do you think of that other agent summary? And I'll say, yeah, that guy's smarter than me. And then you play around with like, okay, well, I could have done some subtle different prompting, or maybe you just want to standardize the prompting so they're all the same. So there's a lot of like human craft in it, but you have to give them at least the bones to do this.
Yeah, that's awesome. I like that guy's smarter than me. And it's funny when agents do critique each other, like Claude critiques Claude. So final question, we're almost out of time. And this is for both of you. I also am going to take a stab at it, but how should we be thinking about when to use Opus 4.6 versus Sonnet 4.6? Does Anthropic recommend using other models ever, or always SOTA, state of the art? So the way that I advise customers is like, find out where the ceiling is. Like make your product magical and awesome, and like do intelligent things that people didn't know was possible with LLMs. And then you can pull it back. But like discover what the maximum is. And we release Sonnet such that like the things you could do with Opus, maybe you can still do that with Sonnet in your product. And that's kind of our goal with Sonnet. And so definitely we want to be able to like allow people to latency and cost optimize. But the way that I would advise product builders, and I spend a lot of time with people building products, is to just like discover where the ceiling is. But curious how you guys both think about it in practice.
Yeah. This is a really interesting one because I'm literally having this conversation this week internally. Yeah, I mean, I think it's actually very similar to you. We always want to pick the best model. that is going to have the best user experience. And that's what we'll pick first and foremost. But it is really cool when you all release things like Sonnet, where you can almost pretty much have the best experience, but usually just faster and cheaper. And so it's something that we think of like as like an, if we can get it to be just as good kind of thing. And we also kind of look a lot, like you said, at, we don't care just about pure accuracy number. It's also a lot about what does the experience feel like in product. And so latency actually does matter a lot to us, and it's something that we weigh pretty heavily. And so in cases where we think we can get a faster experience, again, we want it to feel like a collaborator to you. We're going to optimize a faster model.
Yeah, we feel similar, but Sonnet's a funny thing too. It's like disproportionately better at finance, though on the model card, like not quite as bright as Opus, right? Which makes sense. But on our internal benchmark suite, it was actually like there was no statistically significant difference. So then it becomes about behavior, and then you're like, okay, well, you know, it's cheaper and it's faster. But there's also a lot of things you might do in the product that go beyond finance, right? So like it's a general purpose spreadsheet agent. Finance is not the only thing people do spreadsheets for. So what we probably are converging on is like a toggle to allow users to configure that so that they can get like, you know, more beneficial token consumption. But we do want to be opinionated, and we still haven't made the call because it's so close.
Yeah, I think it's a tough call. And you guys are thinking about it well. I think the toggle too, just like, should you be opinionated about model, or should you let like your user pick what they want to do for the trade-off? Well, we're at time, but I really appreciate you guys coming on today, demoing your products, and also like taking the audience questions.
Our pleasure. Thanks for having us.
That was so fun.
Bye, y'all.
See you guys. Bye.
Bye, everyone.